We're in the last section of Chapter 4, and we have a few outcomes I'd like to cover. We're going to explain how epithelial and connective tissue combine to form 4 types of tissue membranes and specify the functions. We're going to describe the 3 types of muscle tissue and their special structural features of each. We're going to discuss the basic structure and role of neural tissue. We're going to then explain how injuries affect the tissues of the body. And lastly, we're going to describe how aging affects the tissues of the body. There are 4 basic membranes that make up the human body. They include the mucous membranes, the serous membranes, the cutaneous membranes, and the synovial membranes. Here's a picture illustrating where the 4 membranes are. The first is the mucous membranes, and they line the respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive tracts. The serous membranes line the ventral body cavities, and there are 3 divisions there. The cutaneous membrane is the skin, and it covers the outer surface of the body, and the synovial membranes are in the joint cavity and produce fluid within the joints. Now we're going to talk about them in more detail. So the mucous membranes line the pathways that have external connections. They include the digestive, respiratory, urinary, and reproductive tracts. The function is to reduce friction and facilitate absorption and secretion. This shows you where they are. Now, next is the serous membranes. They line cavities not open to the outside world. They are thin and strong. They include the pleura that lines the pleural cavities and covers the lungs, the peritoneum that lines the peritoneal cavities and covers the abdominal organs, and the pericardium that lines the pericardial cavity and covers the heart. This illustrates the serous membranes. Next is the cutaneous membrane, and that is our skin. It covers the surface of the body. It's thick, waterproof, and dry. This image illustrates the cutaneous membrane and the skin that covers the whole human body. Now we have the synovial membrane. It lines moving, articulating joint cavities. It does produce synovial fluid. It's a lubricant, and it protects the ends of the bone. This shows you the synovial membranes in the joint cavities. Now we're going to start muscle tissue. Muscular tissue has 3 divisions. There's skeletal muscle tissue, and they're large body muscles, and they're responsible for movement. There's cardiac muscle tissue, and it's found only in the heart. And then there's smooth muscle tissue that are found in the walls of blood vessels, found around hollow organs such as the urinary bladder, and also in the respiratory, digestive, and reproductive tracts. Now, the functions of muscle tissue are 2. Number 1, it's specialized for contraction, and number 2, it produces all body movement. This is an example of skeletal muscle. This is an example of cardiac muscle. This is an example of smooth muscle. Now we're going to begin nervous tissue. It's also called nerve or nervous tissue or neural tissue. It has 3 functions or characteristics. It's specialized for conducting electrical impulses. It rapidly senses the internal and external environment, and it processes the information and controls responses. Most of the neural tissue is concentrated in the central nervous system, and that's the brain and spinal cord. That contains 98% of all the neural tissue. There are 2 types of neural cells, neurons and neuroglia. Neurons are nerve cells, and they perform the electrical communication. Neuroglia are supporting cells, and they repair and supply nutrients to the neurons. Now, the nerve cell or the actual neuron has 3 parts. The cell body, and that contains the nucleus and the nucleolus. The dendrites are the short branches extending from the cell body, and they receive incoming signals. And then the axon, and that's a long, thin extension of the cell body, and it carries outgoing electrical signals to their destination. This is an illustration of a neuron. Tissues respond to injuries to maintain homeostasis. Cells try to restore homeostasis with two processes, inflammation and regeneration. And the inflammatory response is the tissue's first response to injury. The signs and symptoms include swelling, heat, redness, and pain. This can be triggered by trauma, which can be physical injury, or infection, the presence of harmful pathogens. As a person ages, their ability to repair tissue declines. They also have an increase in cancer rates. The speed and efficiency of tissue repair will decrease with age, and it's due to three things. Number one, there's a slower rate of energy consumption, metabolism. There are hormonal alterations and changes, and then there's a reduced physical activity. Cancer rates increase with age. 1 in 4 people in the United States will develop cancer. Cancer is still the number 2 cause of death in the United States. The two major causes for cancer are environmental chemicals and cigarette smoking.